we're going to go ahead and get started. And Mike and I briefly connected to talk about how this might work. I have a series of questions for him that I can pose to him, but I wanted to open up the floor to him right off the bat to open us up with some introductory comments. So Mike, why don't you take it away?
Thanks very much, Ken. Thanks for the nice introduction. It's great to be back with the North Dallas Chamber. Great to see you and Jeff. Great to see all of you in all of your living rooms. And of course to see some friends here, Jennifer, Dustin, Charles from Encore. There's quite a grid in front of me, so if I've missed anybody that I know well, forgive me, but welcome and thanks everybody. I thought I would take a few minutes to kind of just tell you what's going on with us at the Dallas Morning News, and then just really open it to questions and have a conversation with y'all. And so it is a remarkable world that we're in, right? I wanted to just start by letting you know how quickly things have changed for us at the Dallas Morning News. And I'll tell a little story. In the first week of March, 9 of our journalists went to a professional conference in New Orleans. And they came back to work the next week. That would have been Monday, March 9th. On Tuesday, a month ago today, we got word that someone at that conference, a person from a different news organization, had tested positive for COVID-19. And we also learned that the affected person had shared an Uber with one of our journalists. So on Wednesday the 11th, we sent all 9 journalists home to self-quarantine, along with 8 others that they'd come into contact with at the office since they returned from New Orleans. I should say that none of those people ever got ill. And so far as I know, we still have not had a confirmed case in our company. But the next day, March 12th, was the last day that any of us worked in the downtown office of the Dallas Morning News. So thanks to the magic of technology, the Dallas Morning News is now put out in the dens and living rooms and kitchen tables across North Texas. But the most important thing to us is really not where we're working, but the story itself. And for those of you who are regular readers, and I hope you all are, you know that we've focused on a few themes. The first is just public safety. What do North Texans need to do to keep themselves and their families safe? This is reflected in really everything we do, but an example of this is today's story about Phil Wong, who's of course leading the medical response to this on behalf of Dallas County. Next, how is this crisis affecting the most vulnerable among us, particularly the elderly and the poor? We know that poverty disproportionately affects people of color in our community and all communities, so that's a focus for us. Some of our neighbors don't have the luxury of working at home, and part of the story we're trying to tell is what's happening to those people. Next thing is, what are our elected leaders doing to deal with the crisis, especially locally? That's a hugely important issue. How is the local business community coping with this, and what does it see as the path back to normalcy? And hoping that some of you can give me some insight into your views on that. And then what is it like for all of us to live with this situation? We're doing stories about religious practice, changed religious practice, and dealing with kids at home while you're trying to work, or connecting with loved ones in nursing homes and so on. This has changed the landscape of our lives, and that's an important part of the story that we're trying to tell. So focusing on these stories meant making some fast changes to our staffing. The business of sports is still important to us. Our readers still want to know what the Cowboys draft strategy will be, or when we might expect the new baseball stadium to open. Certainly Ken Malcolmson and I are keenly interested in that answer. But with no high school or college or pro sports to cover, we've deployed about a dozen sports journalists to other areas. One of our high school sports writers filed a piece the other day about a Supreme Court ruling on evictions. And one of our sports editors now leads a team of Metro reporters. Our federal courts reporter is working on the business staff now and had a byline on today's piece about unemployment nationally and in Texas. So lots of changes and lots of flexibility among my staff in getting the job done that we need to do. For those of you who are readers of the print edition, you know that we made changes to the print edition to reflect the new approach to coverage. We put sports inside the A section, cut it down to about 4 pages during the week and put it inside A, though we still keep the Sunday sports section. We created a daily page of coronavirus updates on page 2 and moved our food coverage from Wednesday to Friday. We changed the name of Guide to Guide at Home because there's nowhere to go out in the community for entertainment and dining and so forth. So that whole staff is oriented now towards helping our readers cope with a lockdown, essentially. There's something behind all of that that I think you might find interesting. One of the reasons for changing the paper down to basically 2 daily sections was when our paper is printed and then stuffed into bags by the carriers, the fewer sections we have, the more compact and therefore the safer we can make that process for our carriers. So in order to create social distance for the people who are putting your paper together every morning, we needed to make the paper easier to put together in the bags. And so we've created safe spaces in our distribution centers where the carriers can come in, pick up the papers and stuff them in the bags. And as we've told readers, the person who delivers your paper is the only human being who touches it before you get it. The rest of the process is automated. But that change in the format has helped us deliver the paper on time and more safely to our readers. We've done something else that I like, but I take no credit for because it's an advertising thing and that's not my area. But I'm proud that we're offering free advertising space to restaurants in the Friday Guide at Home section, restaurants that are still open for takeout. So I just think it's an example of our being a good partner in the community and trying to support some business people who are making it across a very tough chasm right now. My role is not to run our business. That's Grant Moise, the publisher's role. I'm the editor-in-chief, but I can tell you that the impact on the business has been tremendous of this, right? Essentially, there's no paid advertising in the weekend section and very little in the print paper generally. And print advertising remains a very big part of our business, even as we plunge more deeply into the digital world. And you probably all saw that we instituted some salary cuts and took some other measures earlier this week to cope with that. We're pleased that we did not need to lay off anybody from our company. We think that the people are needed right now to serve this community and tell the story, but it's not been an easy week for us. The upside of this situation for us business-wise, the number of digital subscribers we have has just boomed. We're setting records every day and every week for new digital subscribers. Even though we're making essential public safety information available for free on the site, we're finding that readers are coming in and consuming a lot of content and buying subscriptions, and that's a good thing for our future. And then the other upside is we have struggled in the last few years to find people to deliver the paper. In an economy where there's practically no unemployment, getting up at 3 in the morning and delivering newspapers is not a lot of people's first choice. Now, sad to say, with so much unemployment, there are a lot of people who are happy to get up and get in a station wagon and deliver the Dallas Morning News. And so our delivery performance and our open routes are at historic lows. So I say that ruefully, but I'm glad for all of you that we can deliver the product on time and safely. The last thought I'll share with you before we open up to questions is just that I am focused as editor on keeping my staff of journalists safe. It's such a big issue for us. And like a lot of other companies, we do not have access to Tyvek suits and N95 masks. We'd actually rather not have those things because they need to be in hospitals and with first responders. But what do we do for photographers and reporters who go out on stories to talk to people in our community? At this point, we have a small number of face masks that are not hospital safe, but that offer some protection. But basically the guidance that I'm giving is none of our journalists should go into a situation that's any more dangerous than a trip to Central Market. So keep your social distance, follow CDC guidelines for hand washing and so forth. Do not shoot photographs inside people's homes. You'll see a lot of photographs now are photographed on people's front steps and out in the street. I'm just trying to make sure that we can get through this crisis healthy and able to do the job the community needs us to do. Those are my thoughts, Ken, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for those thoughts and insights and perspectives. Let me just ask a couple of real quick high-level questions, and then we can open it up to everyone that's on this call. You know, as the editor of a major publication like you are, what is your number one priority before, during, and after a crisis? And does it change based on the period of time?
So my role as editor-in-chief is essentially a strategic role. It's to think about what do we need to be doing, how do we need to be deploying our journalists in the community to do the work that the community needs most from us. So the first job that I had in this situation was to make sure that I had journalists who were healthy and safe who could do the work. And that extends back to that first week when we sent home 17 people for a 2-week quarantine. That they need to have confidence that we're looking out for them and are not going to put them in situations that are unnecessarily difficult or dangerous. Part of the life of a journalist is deciding to go into situations that the general public doesn't, and our people accept that, but we want to mitigate that risk as much as we can. And then during the crisis, to me, the challenge is to understand the most important conversations happening in the community and the most important issues that are playing out, and keep people informed. It's been actually refreshing to me, and this is anecdotal, but my sense is that the world is driven less by false information and nonsense in this situation than I might have feared. That people are turning to trusted sources of information increasingly, and the amount of Facebook nonsense or blog stuff getting spread around that's incorrect seems to me to be less than I might have expected. But I'd be interested in hearing others' views on that.
Great. So what's your research telling you now, Mike? How's the coverage being received by your subscribers, and what is of most interest during this time? I assume you've pivoted towards what's of most interest, but talk to us a little bit about the research that you're getting back right now.
Yes, well, so the research, we don't have any research in the field about print readers' response. At this point, we have just anecdotal information. Our print readers are staying with us. We've had a very small number of readers who are concerned about bringing the newspaper into their home and don't want to do that, and have left us for that reason in the short term. But even then, we've tried to persuade them to take the e-edition, which is the same, it's a replica of the newspaper, and that they can read it on a digital device. So you might have seen solicitations in the paper asking people to activate their digital subscriptions, which are now available to anybody who subscribes in print. In terms of our digital work, we have instant feedback every day on what people are reading and what they care about. And the public safety information is at the top of that list. So if there are new restrictions issued by county or state leaders, people are keenly interested in that. But they're also interested in sort of next level things that may not affect their daily life, but that sort of reflect what's happening in the community. For example, how businesses are approaching this problem, how they're dealing with their own employees. Layoffs obviously are a big story, the changes in the economy. But coronavirus has replaced cowboys at the top of our list for the first, probably 20 or 25 things on our list every day.
Is coronavirus even higher than Steve Brown?
Yeah, Steve Brown. Yeah, Steve Brown is the real estate writer, is a major driver of digital subscriptions at our company.
Yes, of course. You and I talked about this before, but and I don't want to personalize this, but I've been a print edition subscriber for 5 decades now. But since the news cycle is so dynamic and fluid, I find myself weaning myself from the print edition and almost exclusively just accessing the digital, my digital subscription. So is this a common phenomena that's occurring right now? And do you think that this will hasten the demise of print versions in the future?
Well, it's a great question, and the answer to it is has a couple of layers. First, at the Dallas Morning News, we perceive that our print readers are extremely dedicated to us, and that there's a robust demand for a printed edition. So as we approached this crisis, there was no discussion in our company, no serious discussion in our company of decreasing the number of days a week that we would print the paper. We just don't think that that's what our audience wants from us. My son, two of my three kids are journalists, and my son, who is a reporter in Tampa Bay, his paper, the Tampa Bay Times, recently went from 7 days a week of print, which they'd maintained for 120 years or so, down to 2 days of print. And they moved other readers over to the replica edition. In that community, that was met with some resistance from people there. But my own view is that in the big picture, it may be positive for some media companies to give their audiences a nudge in that direction, because someday we'll all need to be there. I don't know. I don't think it's the right time for us, but I'll be interested to see what happens in Tampa Bay. And then, I'm sorry, Ken, I forgot the other part of your question.
No, we're just talking about hastening the demise,
Yeah,
and I think you've answered that. So
okay, good.
That's helpful. So, what does the Dallas Morning News look like post-pandemic? Will you go back to the traditional sections and topics that you had in the past, or are you planning for even a much different look and feel post-pandemic?
No, the plan today is to return to the Dallas Morning News that people are used to and frankly pay us for. We've made the paper a little smaller now and asked for forbearance of our audience, and we're largely receiving that. But the Sports Day section is a storied section nationally. This is such a great sports city. We have tremendous fans, and so we're eager to restore that daily sports section and tell those stories. So as we we don't know what the future holds, but as we sit here, we can't wait to get back to the time when we give you the several section paper every day that we're accustomed to giving you.
Great. So, Mike, this is a difficult topic that during the past year, you've had to make some very difficult management decisions, including layoffs in 2019 and now pay cuts for you and your staff. Tell us about the toll that is taken on you and the team and the cultural implications.
We did layoffs in the beginning of 2019. We laid off 24 journalists and then another couple dozen people around the company. And I think everybody on this video conference is aware of the pressures on the media business and the changing way that we're funded. Those things were necessary for us to operate successfully. Those were extremely painful for everyone involved, as you can imagine. These pay cuts relative to that felt a little bit more like a relief to a lot of us, because if you look around the media world, you see really, really good institutions like D Magazine doing layoffs, and many newspapers doing layoffs. A few smaller weekly newspapers around the country have folded because they rely exclusively on entertainment advertising. Some of the traditional alt weeklies are folding completely. And none of us want to be put out into an economy where we now have 17 million Americans applying for unemployment. So we're grateful to have the opportunity to keep doing the work. I'm too dyed-in-the-wool journalist and too cynical to ever be a shill for any company, including my own. But I am very appreciative of our board of directors investing $8 million in balance sheet cash to keep us going and invest in our future. We're really lucky not to have debt at our company and to be able to bridge this kind of crisis with some cash. So look, nobody's happy, especially at the lower ends of the salary scale. Nobody's happy about a pay cut. And I worry about some of the young journalists working for me who are on their own for the first time and are seeing their $44,000 salaries taken down to 41.5 or something. It's a tough thing, and it's deeply personal to them. That said, I've been impressed with the way they've rallied and their dedication to doing the work.
It's great. Thanks, Mike. I know that's been very hard on you. When we talked in January of 2019, you could just feel the strain that you were personally experiencing. So yes, I know how hard that has to be. So,
Thank you.
So the big question that we ask all of our guests in our leadership briefing series is, how will the coronavirus pandemic impact how news is delivered in the future? I know that's a wide open-ended question, but what are your thoughts on that, Mike?
I touched briefly on this question of how people will consume news, and I think that it is going to move the needle more quickly towards digital consumption of news across the board in media, and I think that'll probably be true for us. We see a lot of people now subscribing digitally or activating their digital access that they already have through the paper, and I think that for a lot of people, it'll overcome that sort of maybe mental barrier they have about, I have to read it in print. I think some people are going to start to get comfortable with digital uptake. And I have to say that'll be a good thing for our business in the very long term because the cost of printing newspapers and driving them to your house is extremely high. And it's difficult for us to share that with you at a level that makes it economical. The larger question about news, I think, goes to really societal questions and political questions in our world. We are living in a time where the question of what to believe and what sources to believe is central to all of our understanding of the world, all of our understanding of news. And I'm going to be fascinated to see at the end of this whether institutions such as news media and government and the courts will be raised in people's esteem relative to where they were before it started. Will Americans feel like they were well served by institutions like the Dallas Morning News and by Clay Jenkins and other elected officials? Or will there be a sort of deepening distrust of institutions that we've seen over time? I think the early signs are good that that people are seeking out information they can trust and that on which they can stake their health and their family's health.
Yeah, thank you for that. And on the economic front, I know this is more in Grant's arena, but tell us how you feel that the digital transformation is going for the Dallas Morning News in general, outside of the coronavirus pandemic, and specifically related to ensuring adequate revenue sources in the future.
From a journalistic point of view and a reader point of view, the digital transformation is going beautifully. I mean, our digital audience accounts for the largest audience we've ever had in the 135-year history of the Dallas Morning News. We have more readers today than we've ever had, and that's a great thing. We've seen that explode even further in this situation. I think that we've gotten pretty good at delivering news digitally. Our new website is a great improvement on the old one. We're very adept at breaking news on social media and connecting with readers through newsletters and push alerts telling you of important news in the community. So we are a much more relevant and urgent news source than we've ever been. The revenue is growing because of all of that. It is not growing as quickly as the advertising revenue and the print readership revenue is falling. And that's the essential business problem for institutions like mine. We are succeeding with readers. We are succeeding in connecting digitally, but we need to succeed faster in order to sustain newsrooms at the kind of scale that the Dallas Morning News has and uses to serve a broad audience.
Great. Thanks. All right, well, then I'm going to conclude my questions with one that's near and dear to your heart and my heart, and that is, will we have a baseball season this year, and how do you think your beloved Red Sox are positioned?
I'm actually a little pessimistic about whether we'll have a baseball season this year, and I guess I'd ask all of you to just reflect on what would it take you to go and sit in a ballpark uh, in order to be comfortable with that? How much time would have to pass, and what kind of assurances would you need? So I feel a little bit pessimistic about that. Given that my beloved Red Sox looked like they were headed to a second division finish on the strength of no pitching and having traded away their top star, I don't really mind if they skip this season in some ways.
That's great. That's great. All right, Mike, a couple of quick comments that are coming. By the way, if anybody has any questions, either raise your virtual hand or just put them in the Zoom group chat, and I will identify you, and you can ask your questions directly to Mike. But I do have a couple of comments that came from the audience. First, from Michael Martin. He wants to give a big shout out. Thank you for continuing to provide quality, real, relevant, fact-based news during this unique time in our city. Thank you, Michael. And from someone who did not identify themselves, but saying your favorite chamber member, it says, mother-in-law reads the paper with a mask and gloves on, not going online. So I thought that was great.
That is great.
Jenny, do you have a question that you have, observation and a question. So Jenny King from UT Southwestern.
Sure, and pardon my baseball cap. It's a Friday and I apologize for that. So I'm very interested in your observations that you've already shared and any more thoughts you might have about turning to trusted sources during this time. It would delight me if this, balance things out, because I think some of the noise out there had just gotten too great. And so I hope that this shows people that the Dallas Morning News and other news sources are out there really trying to find out answers about what's happening and valuable information about public safety, the human interest story, the business story. So I appreciate your work on that and any other thoughts you might have on that. And then I know that you guys, I'm just curious about the comment section. And I don't know why, because usually you go there and then you're just, horrified at what people say. But I'm curious about why you guys turned them off and how you decide to turn them on for particular articles. Thank you.
Jenny, thanks for the questions. It's good to see you. Before I take those on, just a word to Michael Martin. Thanks so much for those words. I see you here on the screen and really appreciate that. Jenny, let me start with the comments first. We used to have comments available on all stories, and it was an absolute putrid Roman bath of discourse in those things. I have a good friend in journalism who says that having comments on really good news stories is like serving filet mignon with a side of maggots. It was just awful for our readers to endure that, and we thought that we needed to create a better environment and a healthier environment for our readers who pay us good money to see these articles. So we shut down comments for a while, and we've now brought them back. And the reason that we're limiting the number of articles on which we receive comments now is person power, staffing. We want to moderate comments. We want to be in the discussion with you. And we find that, and research shows that if news organizations have somebody stationed in the comments to say, hey, thanks for that question, then everybody's behavior is better and the discussion is much more productive. The team that makes that decision is what we call the audience team. We have a person who runs a team whose job is to make sure that we get the most important information to the audiences who need it through social media, through newsletters, and so forth. And so that audience team designates what they think of as the most interesting and maybe controversial sometimes stories of the day and opens them up for comments. Your other question, Jenny, about trusted news sources was, I've often said, and I think I've said to this group before, that probably 10% of what I think about as editor of the Dallas Morning News is national politics, but 80% of the fights I have with readers are about that. We're really a regional news organization focused on what's happening in our community, and we're finding that in this time of the coronavirus, the most important stories are local. What did it mean when the Board of County Commissioners moved the disaster proclamation to May 20th, but the stay-at-home order only until April 30th? I mean, it was important for us to be here and walk readers through that. And so when it's a matter of life and death, we're finding that the community is delighted, actually, to have 140, 150 journalists here on the ground getting answers for them.
Thanks, Mike. We have a question from Council Member Jennifer Gates. So, Jennifer?
Let me get off mute, sorry. And I'm like Jenny, I'm taking Casual Friday to an extreme. I'm like staying in my workout clothes and getting outside in between calls. No, I'm just curious on what Mike's opinion would be regarding what the impact of this crisis, and my impression is going to linger. I mean, we're going to have social distancing at some level. I would think all the way through a lot of the summer. But so how do you think that's going to impact the November election? Does that, I kind of think that incumbents have an advantage, but I'm just curious what you're thinking. And obviously the coverage now, your coverage, where it was all, weighed heavily on the election, now we're, having a lot of other stories related to the coronavirus and the crisis. So.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's a good question, and I'll start by issuing the caveat that all of my political predictions are always wrong, and so everybody needs to understand that going in. I think that the most interesting aspect of this to me is what Gromer Jeffers wrote about today, which is how will people vote, whether it's in a runoff in July or the general election in November. And the answer to that I think will determine the outcomes to a great deal. So if voting is limited to the traditional voter, usually the older Americans, then you'll probably have one set of outcomes in terms of elections across the board. But if we are able to go out and vote, or if mail voting or absentee voting is expanded, and therefore the voting populace is expanded, you may have a different outcome depending on how other political winds blow. But the story that I want to follow so closely is just what are we going to agree on as citizens about how we will cast ballots?
To Jennifer's question about will the incumbents have an advantage, I know one incumbent who's on this call that was hoping that he'll have an advantage.
I was going to stay silent on that, Ken. I can't say I'm incredibly pleased to be on the November ballot at all, but we're going to make the best of a bad situation and see how you run a nonpartisan race at the bottom of a highly contested partisan presidential election and pray for the best.
Yes. Dustin, if I may ask you, what is your approach to campaigning and to reaching voters right now?
To tell you the truth, Mike, I don't know yet. We've been so focused on dealing with the aftermath of this COVID situation that I've suspended all campaign activities and am focused exclusively on trying to help kids through this crisis, and then personally focused on family and trying to keep my business alive during this downturn. So we haven't convened as a campaign team or talked through where we're headed. When the campaign picks up, probably in August timeframe, we'll revisit that, and I'd probably be in a better position to answer your question then. But our strategy, I'm sure, will focus around the successes of the district and where we've been over the last couple of years. I mean, there's been as you know from the coverage that the paper provides, we're in the midst of an amazing turnaround story, and I think that the current composition of the board and the superintendent are largely responsible for a big piece of that. And so, I think now's not the time for change, and our campaign strategy will revolve around that message. And I think people are also pretty pleased with, at least from what I've heard, and I get a lot of comments, some negative, some positive. I know Jennifer has the same, but as it relates to the district's corona response and the tornado response, the comments have been overwhelmingly positive, and I'm hopeful that message sticks with voters through November.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So we have a question from a North Dallas Chamber past board chair, Ramon Miguez. Ramon, by the way, Ramon is with HDR. So Ramon, do you ever want to pose your question directly? Don't hear Ramon, so I'll go ahead and ask his question for him. It's what advice can Mike give us with regards to discerning truth in the barrage of information that we receive digitally? You've touched on that a little bit, but can you go into a little bit more depth on that?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Ramon. I think understanding the sourcing of information that you get is important. So to the extent that a news organization lists or discloses the sources of information, that's very important. If you're reading something online and something is asserted, but there's no authority given for that, then I would be skeptical. Also, in evaluating news sources generally, gravitate towards ones that correct their errors. So if you see a correction on an article, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a bad thing for that article and for that reporter that day to have made the error, but a good thing for a news organization to say, whoops, our bad, we got this one wrong, and here's the right information. That's a hallmark of trustworthy news organizations.
Great. So we have another elected official on the call that we mentioned earlier, from the town of Farmers Branch, Crystal Ratana, council member there, also with Children's Health. So Crystal, you have a question for Mike.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. So, during this time, your Dallas Morning News Digital has been critical for us to get information. And one of the things you mentioned earlier was, as part of one of your focus areas, was that you are focusing on really how this crisis is affecting those most vulnerable in our city. So my question is are you all doing anything differently to try and reach those communities, the Latino community, the African American community? We know that, county is working on these red zones to try to see if we can kind of deploy resources to those areas to more educate these folks on really truly the importance of staying at home and some of those things. So just curious to see if y'all are doing anything differently to try to reach those populations.
Thank you. Great question. So one of the vision elements, pardon me, I needed to mute for a minute to clear my throat. I've set out some vision elements for our staff to fulfill the vision that I've set forth and that we all share for our coverage. And one of those is to reflect our community both in our staffing and our sourcing. In other words, in what we cover. So in terms of hiring, we've added a great deal of diversity. I think it was 26 out of the last 51 full-time journalists I hired were journalists of color. Spanish language skills are an increasingly important part of our, increasingly a priority for us in a community that's 40% Hispanic origin. And so if you look at the bylines in our paper, you'll see a great number of Latino and Latina journalists who are operating bilingually in the community. So just on the staffing side, that's very important. On the coverage side, we do audits of our reporters' work to ask them, when you are quoting sources and you have a choice of whom to quote, do you always go back to the traditional sources who tend to be, in a lot of cases, white and male, or are you seeking out experts who come from other backgrounds? Are you going into communities that are less traditional customer communities for the Dallas Morning News? So I hope that you'll watch closely that who's represented in the pages and online in the Dallas Morning News, because it's a huge priority for us to show the entire community that we cover.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. We have a question from Mary Ann, and she's asked, well, Mary Ann, are you available? Can you jump on and ask your question directly?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for all of this commentary. It's really helpful. So I work for a PR agency, and I know that our job has changed just as much as yours really has in terms of trying to reach members of the editorial staff and kind of just wanting to know how can we best support your team, especially as their beats are changing. Should we continue to pitch, send along local experts, submit op-eds, kind of what is the best way to reach you and to support your team?
Thank you. It's a great question. I do encourage you to continue to pitch. It would help us if you, and will help you, I think, to be aware of our priorities right now. And so I'll mention them again. Public safety, how the vulnerable are affected, what are elected leaders doing, how's the business community coping, and how are we all living with this as a society? Those are really focus areas for us right now, and we welcome the chance to talk to people who are expert in different areas, especially those related to how people can live better and safer lives in this circumstance. I think we posted a video about what is the right way to wash your hands, where a Baylor nurse came in and did a video with us to just show this is the right way to really sterilize your hands. And we did an Instagram story about how to make a reasonably good face mask at home. So Marianne, if you have pitches along the lines of this will help our readers cope with this and live a better life, those would be helpful.
Great, thank you so much.
Mike, Council Member Kara Mendelson has joined our call since we first started, and she's unfortunately not available to ask the question right now, but she asked if I could ask this. She'd be interested in your comments about serving such a large region and the challenges you face in reporting on all the different communities. It would be easier. Oh, I'm sorry. That's in effect the question.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think I may have talked about this, Ken, and other talks you've heard about how the pressures on our industry have caused newspaper staffs to shrink and therefore changed the extent to which we can cover communities and especially small governments on the ground. It's been bad for newspapers, bad for journalism, and bad for democracy, I think, to see that dwindle. But here's our strategy to build it back. Earlier this year, we launched what we call the 10 City Newsletter Project. And we've launched newsletters in a diverse set of communities in Dallas where you can sign up and you can get a newsletter called Plano Matters or McKinney Matters or Mesquite Matters, and soon to be launched are DeSoto Matters and Redbird Matters, where we've deployed reporters in those areas to put out a weekly summary of local news of interest to people in those communities that they can subscribe to by email. And as from a business point of view, for us, hopefully those people become enchanted with the other offerings of the Dallas Morning News digitally and become customers of ours. From a journalism point of view, it helps us to start to expand back into some of the communities that we used to cover as a matter of course. And we're hoping that this digital inroads can help us grow audience and provide better coverage around the area.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the floor right now? I wanted to acknowledge a few people that are on this call. One, Jason Bloom joined us relatively late in the process, and Jason is one of our sponsors. He's with Haynes and Boone, so thank you, Jason, for your support of this series. And I also wanted to recognize the truly iconic and famous Carol Short. She's on this call as well. And Carol, thanks for joining us today. She always has some great perspectives. Do you have a question for Mike, Carol? I guess we don't hear her, but Mike, if you don't remember Carol, I'm not sure if you remember Carol, but she was a long time head of public relations, government affairs, and in effect our chief operating officer at the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce for 33 years, and so
yes.
Retired last year. So That's great. So I don't see any other questions. Mike, do you have any closing comments before we conclude this program?
Well, I started my day with a note to my whole staff saying, it's a beautiful day outside. And I asked them to take a walk. I said, you've got time, take a little walk, take a photo of something beautiful and put it in our Slack channel, which is called Good Vibes, so that we can all feel a little bit good about something. So I guess I'd just, I'm not much of an advice giver, but if any of y'all want to join in that, just enjoy this day, because in spite of everything, it sure is a nice one.
Well, that's great. That's a great way to end a day that and a week that's been challenging for all of us. This is a somber day also in the Christian tradition, since it's Good Friday, and it's also been a somber time in our history as a country this last several weeks. But this has been a breath of fresh air, Mike. We really can't thank you enough for being here.